Hello, my astro-interested friends. This is Heather Rowan Robbins speaking to you from Ronan, Montana on a beautiful summer day. This is July 30th, 2025. Now, I've been an astrologer for over 40 years, and I work with We Moon Calendar to predict the year ahead for decades, with Starcodes Astro Oracle, or the Starcodes Astrocast. Every week, I write about the week ahead and talk about it online under Access Astrology with two other astrologers, where we do individual case studies as well as talk about the week ahead. But here I talk about the month coming up to give you an overview of this exciting time, put it into perspective, and then spend some time with some of my favorite astrologers. In about 15 minutes, we're going to talk to Sam Reynolds about the African diaspora and its effect on astrology and the African origins of many of our astrological concepts, deities, and archetypes. So I'm looking forward to that. Right now, I want to talk about the astrology of the moment. This year, and you probably have felt it, we just had a major earthquake in Russia yesterday. The world is shifting and changing. I'm expecting and have predicted, as many astrologers have, lots of minor earthquakes and all the parables and metaphors you can imagine with that this year. From last December through next spring, we have 5 major outer planets. I'm going to be talking about this a lot, which have changed signs from fairly introverted signs to more extroverted, outgoing signs. Now, I've looked back for hundreds of years in history and have not found another time when all these 5 planets change signs at one time. So Pluto, and they're all right now because they all move at different cycles. But they're all close to these degrees. Pluto is at, I'm going to bring this up, show you today's date, and we have Pluto at 2 degrees of Aquarius, Saturn and Neptune at 1 degree of Aries. Now they're going to move forward, they're going to retrograde back for the fall and be here again next spring. We're going to go back into Pisces briefly. Uranus has recently entered Gemini. It will come back to this degree or within a degree of this degree next spring, but it is in Gemini, and it's 84-year cycle. Jupiter just entered Cancer. So it's moved forward a little bit. It's past those early degrees, but it's still just in Cancer. And with all these outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Jupiter, just changing signs, that's like changing our instruction manuals. That's changing the experiences. And when a planet changes signs, as Venus will tonight, at 9:53 p.m. Mountain Time, but we'll be there for next month. As Venus changes signs, it will start to ring this pattern off like a bell. Every time a planet changes signs, when the moon changes signs, every 2.5 days, it's going to ring these planets like a bell, and they're giving conflicting information. Do we go deep? Do we do existential angst? Do we hover in place? Do we push change? All of these are happening at once. So if you feel like the world's giving you mixed messages, you're right. That's what's happening. So we're going to roll with that. Tonight, what we'll see over the next few days, this is on August 11th. This is we're going to go back here. August 8th, we're going to be some interesting aspects, as that's when Mars enters Libra next Thursday. And Mars, when Mars goes into Libra, it sets off this grand trine with the kite. Mars in Libra, will help us relax from right now. Venus and Mars are both in nervy signs. They're both in Mercury ruled Gemini and Virgo. Venus leaves Gemini tonight. Mars leaves Virgo next week. And while they're in these Mercury ruled signs, Mercury is very retrograde and will be until August 11th. So the communication, trying to really feel understood, if we can do that with actions rather than words right now, with just acceptance and love and rolling with the punches, it's not every uh, Mercury bring retrograde brings up such slapstick, and it goes retrograde for 3 weeks, 3 times a year, and it so many things can go sideways or a little off. Though everything that we're good at doing, of reviewing, remembering, reliving, can be delicious. Anything that begins RE. Mercury retrograde is refresh, renew, refill, all those wonderful things. Just watch Wild Thoughts. We saw the Mercury retrograde of the there's often some small or big disaster under Mercury retrograde. Well, most of us are doing fine, just dropping our peanut butter once in a while or something odd, or having a communication glitch or forgetting to send an email. It's a wonderful time to go back and repair some things from the past, but can be a little problematic. The gunman who decided his brain had been damaged by football drove across country. It's got travel is Mercury. Neurological damage or neurology is Mercury. Took a gun and got on the wrong elevator. Was heading for the NFL office, but instead ended up in an office of a real estate company that buys up real estate and then rents it at higher prices. A lot of people have some questions about that kind of business, but it was the wrong office and killed people. It's a very lineup of Mercury retrograde problems. And if you're in the NFL office, it probably saved you, but it's a real tragedy elsewhere. So when you go to get on your high horse or get excited or get upset about something, slow it down, think it through, speak it clearly with one another right now. So we've got this aspect happening on Mars opposing the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Now, Saturn and Neptune have conjunct every 500 years or so in Aries. Normally it's every 37 years they conjunct, but it's been a very long time since they did. It's only been 4 times in the last 2,000 years that they've done it in Aries. So we don't have a lot of history to look at for this. We do feel that whenever Saturn and Neptune come together, there's an existential questioning, an angst, a dissolving of old boundaries, a feeling of the plate tectonics shift, weather systems stalling out, emotional conditions stalling out. But mainly it asks us to really look at our philosophy, our spiritual path. Are we walking our talk? So when the planets head off into this, are we walking our talk? How can we work with our community? Pluto is now in Aquarius. It has left Capricorn, and the need for community, for the people to educate themselves on how to take power is the question for Pluto in Aquarius. And how do we create change with that? Now, one of the exciting things that's going to be happening later this month is Neptune is moving into a sextile with Pluto. It's going to be 1 of 5 over the next 2-3 years, and that a sextile between our outer planets it asks us to make changes that help us get in line with our philosophies, make things work in moving forward. This prepares us for the very exciting Pluto-Uranus trine, which starts next summer through 2028, that will really, I think, we'll see the shifts that we're just feeling beginning now. Where are those shifts taking us? Whenever Pluto and Uranus talk together, they squared when Obama came into office. They conjunct um, in the mid 60s, mid to late 60s, and changed our world. Whenever they interact, we go through big conceptual, cultural, social shifts. It's nice to know we've got that coming up. So anyway, we're going to feel that first taste of it next week as Pluto and Neptune form a sextile, which I'm excited about. Then Mercury turns direct on August 11th. We're going to start to see the momentum building up. Mars will be just past that. You can expect some real challenges to relationships and in politics and in the world as Mars in very peaceful Libra opposes that Saturn and Neptune. And we may see some real heat around the problems of in Gaza, in the Mideast, about how do we walk our talk in a way that we are not doing now. Mars in Libra wants social justice. Mars talks about whatever really ticks us off, whatever makes us passionate, whatever makes us excited. We'll see that Jupiter is coming to conjunct Venus. They will be conjunct on that same day that Mercury turns direct. Mars is still in this grand trine. And often when Mercury turns direct, a lot comes unstuck, including the crazy thoughts people have had while Mercury is retrograde that come out into the open. It's a chance to clear the gutters. So there's a time when we need to correct the problems and feel that turbulence as Mercury turns direct, as it appears to change signs. We'll notice that August 20th, you'll feel the changes building as on the 20th, we're seeing the moon conjunct all those planets in Cancer. We're moving into, Venus will be well into Cancer by that point. Mars and Mercury run conjunct, run a sextile from the 11th through the 20th. That's why I did this. And they will be sextile, which really helps kind of get the ball rolling. This Mercury retrograde, everything is slowing down. This week through August 11th, if the more we push, the more problems we have, the more we can really refill the wells, tend to old business, take a deep breath, and not push forward, the better we'll be. Then Mercury turns direct and it moves into that sextile for several days with Mars, energizing it, pumping it up, and helping us gear up for a very busy year ahead. And so start making your contacts, making your connections. On August 24th, right after the new moon in Virgo, on the 22nd, the sun goes into Virgo, and I don't think there's any point in sending anybody back to school before the sun goes into Virgo. Our minds are still doing what we need to do while the sun is in Leo, which is engaging in the arts festivals, centering, refilling our wells, having a life, and learning how to center ourselves so we take care of ourselves when we get busy in the fall, when the sun goes into Virgo and Mercury is cranking up. So I'm excited about those patterns and that when we really will see the work coming forward, know that when that caring for people and helping them get through these times can be really tricky. And we want them to nourish them and to move them forward. So in a few minutes, I'm going to have Sam come on. Now, Sam is an astrologer that I met years ago at the conferences. And what I noticed is that many astrologers know so much, but they're not always good at teaching it or explaining it in a great way. And what I found when I first heard Sam speak at a conference, I go, there's someone who knows how to teach. There's someone who knows how to put the material together in a way that we can understand and see it and not just have to work really hard when someone presents material that's interesting to them but doesn't know how the process of teaching itself. Knowing material is different. So that was my first experience with Sam, and I'm going to bring him on. I'm going to take this off, and Sam has his own PowerPoint presentation to bring. Hello, Sam. It's so good.
Hello, Heather.
We've been talking for decades.
Yep, we have.
Can you introduce yourself? I introduced how I met you and what a
Yeah.
teacher
Well,
you
thank
are.
you. I heard a little bit of that just now, and I saw you for 824, 25, just talking about that chart. It looks very interesting with the moon
Doesn't it?
conjoined to the nodes. So I'm Sam Reynolds. I live where Heather used to live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am from the
Still a
East
heart home.
Coast.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm from Buffalo, New York originally, but I've lived in Philadelphia, Brooklyn, New York, and Newark, and Syracuse as well. Syracuse University. Um, I moved out to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 2021, May, but thanks to Alan Oken, who we both knew and loved, um, I had my first foray into Santa Fe, and I'm going to say that was 2003,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
where I was brought there for a week long symposium. He brought together various teachers in the area, you and Ariel Gutman and Marcia Stark. And I was still relatively a baby astrologer, so you were one of my teachers. Um, and so I cherished that time and cherished my memory of Santa Fe enough that
Mm-hmm.
it brought me back to live. And I got into astrology going back farther, 10 years from that point, more like 1991. I got into it trying to disprove it. So I spent 10 years, uh,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
10 years trying to disprove it, only to end up joining the team and getting my certifications initially from NCGR and then much later from ESAR. And so I've been a
Wonderful.
practicing astrologer since not too far from that time that I met you, 2002. I hung out my shingle, but there was still a lot more to learn, and there's still a lot more to learn. That's one of the things
There's we
I
love
love
about
about it.
astrology.
Yeah, there's
It
always
never
more to
ends.
learn.
Right.
Yeah,
It never ends. I'm always learning, and I learn from every astrologer I know and meet. And that you also had a fairly academic background to begin with, that you're
yeah,
bringing
I
some of
did.
your intellectual rigor into astrology.
Yes, yeah, I was an academic when I encountered astrology. I would say officially, with an actual astrologer. I was pursuing my master's and PhD in African American studies. Although, yes, it is ethnic centered, it was more along the lines of race, gender, and class. And so it was the height of the postmodern era. There's a lot of different scholarly banter around and meta thinking. And even the concept of metacognition became more of a thing
Mhm.
during that
Mhm.
time.
Mhm. Mhm.
So my initial introduction to astrology, even as I was seeking to disprove it, was more the idea of it's an interesting hermeneutic, and so I have
Mhm.
always kept a certain rigor, and I actually describe myself somewhat playfully as an in-house skeptic. I'm the guy who literally will say, and I say this now, I'm not skeptical as much about astrology, but I am still skeptical of astrologers, including myself.
Oh, I'm with you 300%.
Yeah. So,
And
mhm.
you made a comment fairly recently about that you will not dissect after somebody dies, like,
Immediately
oh,
after
it's
someone
all
dies.
there.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that is not useful for, I mean, it's good to see where the markings were, but there are so many different ways we can live out those markings, that to say like, oh, this is this of course that happened, I don't think is useful to astrology or to people. I want people to say these are the symbols. How else could you have lived them out besides stand in front of that truck? Like, what can you do with these transits? Otherwise, it's not really useful. And
Correct.
I really appreciated that you have that. Let's slow that down and look at this more
Yeah.
carefully.
Because I mean, I find in general skeptics of astrology are lazy in the sense that they haven't really studied astrology. So they really look at it through the prism of their untutored understanding. And what that means practically is that they think that we think it's only about 12 signs of the zodiac,
Right.
whereas they don't know that we look at the planets and look at the dimensions of it. But if they were more studious and more astute, there are probably some things they really could point out about us, that we don't hold ourselves as scrutinizing as much. So, for instance, like what you just brought,
Agree.
it's what Heather is referencing is a Facebook post that I put up where astrologers immediately after someone dies trying to say like, well, look, it's right here. It's Saturn or Neptune. Neptune was going over this particular part. And I'm like, yeah, Neptune never went over that part before. So
Right.
why did he die at that particular time? Or why is this person who also was born at that time not dying?
Mhm. Mhm.
So what are we really saying, especially when we talk to the public? And then I think the bigger issue is like, why do you need to do that before the person's even in the ground,
Right.
right? I mean, like, I don't see the rush.
I see one of the misuses of astrology is to feel like we can control our life.
Mhm.
And I remember Michael Luton once said how that Pluto often has to get really creative with astrologers because we think we can control it. We see the transit coming, that we're going to manage it. But the whole point of a Pluto transit is to not be in control for a while, is to really work with the giant forces of the cosmos.
Mm.
And since we try so hard to be in control of it, it has to get really creative. And I have noticed that one of the pieces on that sense of I call my work choice based astrology, that we're looking at the symbols but we still retain our way of responding to these very complex cycles. One Neptune transit, one Pluto transit, it's all so many different layers that make your moment. How can you work with that rather than be stuck by it?
Yeah, and to your point, star codes, it's deciphering them. And when you realize that there are multiple ways that you can decipher a message, then you can see that you can get creative, more imaginative, and it's not just, I mean, yes, the transit is in that sense fated, but how
Hmm.
you deal with that fated
Exactly.
moment becomes, more,
Exactly.
the
That's where the
condition.
power is.
That's the
That's where
power.
the empower. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that your degree was in African American studies it and you've combined that with astrology. And I'm really fascinated by how, different concepts around the world besides the Eurocentric approach perceive astrology. I've got a chance to work with some native astronomers and I want to hear this, and I've really interested in how, the Asian astrologers perceived the same archetypes but with different mythologies, different stories. Tell me what you've come to see in your. I'd love to hear more about your work.
Well, yeah. So I'm going to start off with the bigger picture, and then I'm just getting up my presentation for today. And it's not so much a presentation, but kind of a walkthrough on some of my ideas. And so, please let me know if I go too fast. But just to give you the big picture and give your viewers and listeners the big picture, um, I'm interested in, as you mentioned, indigenous other ways of knowing, because one of the things that we don't often acknowledge is that the quote unquote arrival of Western civilization is not as clear cut as we're taught in school.
Mhm.
And not just in terms of the dimensions of power, and people have documented and talked about the violence that has ensued, whether we're talking about indigenous people or enslaved people. I think that's definitely a big part of the narrative. But I think what isn't part of the narrative, and this is what really was eye opening in grad school for me in African American studies, is that the nomenclature for the idea of the West, the idea of Europe, the idea of Africa, and the words I'm using, idea of them, they are ideas. They're not something that has always existed extant.
Mhm.
Europeans
Mhm.
didn't become Europeans until the mid millennium of the last millennium. So this idea that, well, Greeks are Europeans just like, or the ancient Greeks are Europeans just like the Western Europeans. No, they're not.
Mm-mm.
In fact, the ancient Greeks would be horrified to learn that they were lumped in with Western
Mhm.
Europeans who they considered as barbarians, literally
Absolute
barbar.
barbarian. Jet.
Yeah, they would just be like, no, not. And same thing for the Romans. And
Mhm.
so the interesting thing that Europe has assimilated Rome and Greece into the origins of their civilization is a power move. Um,
Very interesting point.
yeah,
Very
it's a
powerful
power move.
point.
Yeah, it's a power move on the part of Europe, what became Europeans
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
history. And so when you learn to parcel through history, you get to see that it's more, a hegemonic assemblage of views, whether we talk about how women are perceived, how Africans are perceived, how all these different ways and groupings, what's now called identity politics, how that really starts with the crafting of a central identity.
Mhm.
and everything else becomes quote unquote marginal. So my work is more about how to bring more what's on the margins toward the center, not
Mhm.
necessarily to denigrate what's at the center. You know, a lot of people think that's part of my project, and it's not. It's more so to highlight where we can mutually create space for each other without negating each other. And I think that's kind of more what has happened.
I I always think of it at when I'm seeing astrology from a totally different perspective. That's the metaphor I work with. Is I'm it's you live in New Mexico. I think of the mountain of Sandia, and which, if you look on one side, it's a gentle slope, on the other side, it's a jagged cliff.
Mhm.
And you don't understand it until you see it from every possible perspective.
Well said. Yeah,
And if you're
that's
only seeing it from one side, you'd miss the three dimensionality, the complexity, the history of it. So the more perspectives we can bring, it's not nullifying the other one, it is adding dimensions that we couldn't see from our perspective.
yeah, that's well said. And you know, the thing is, I just learned this recently. Even though I speak some Spanish, I'm not
Hmm.
fluent. I mean, I need to,
Hmm.
get that. I just learned that sandia is Spanish for watermelon, and so
Perfect.
the sandia mountains, are reflective of that, and so you won't get that until you, like you said, you see it from multiple
Different perspective. Yeah.
perspectives.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. So roll ahead with your presentation, my dear. I'll
Yeah.
put it up,
So yeah,
add
I'm
it
going.
to the stage. There we go.
Yeah,
Hmm.
is it at the stage now? And then I
Hmm.
will get back to where I can see it and advance it. Um, yeah, there we are. Like as we practiced. Um, and let me just do something. Just make sure I want to be able to see you. Well, you can see me.
Hmm. I can
Did
see
it
you.
move? Did it
Yep,
go
it's
to
all,
100?
everything is fine.
So one thing I do want to give, as part of my academic background, I want to cite sources, and I am going to do that for those who are watching this. I'm going to give definite credit to Dr. Ali Alomi for coining more the phrase of Afro-Asiatic astrology, because what he maintains, and he's still very much alive. I know it says Doctor honoring Dr. Alomi as if I'm eulogizing the brother, and he's not. He's still very much with us. He's younger than I am. He's a young man, I think, and he lives in California. That's why I made it that point, to say he lives in California, post and podcast regularly. Um, is that I'd always had my problems with the term Western astrology, but he coined and now has popularized in calling it Afro-Asiatic astrology. And I think that's important. Now you might say, like, well, are you denigrating or not
No,
acknowledging that
don't worry.
the
Yeah.
Hellenistic, well, not even for you, but for those listening and
Hmm.
watching, are you denigrating the Hellenistic contribution? No, not at all. I think they were brilliant synthesizers in terms of how they drew concepts. But one of the things for folks to understand and look at historically, because it's not just that like astrology just surfaced and that there's only one astrology, there's astrologies, multiple forms of it. But one thing that's not acknowledged is that for most of the 20th century, these cultures, whether we're talking about in Asia, India, specifically, and then also in Egypt, which is in Africa, they weren't credited with contributing to astrology. It was almost like they were deemed a proto astrology,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
um, it was more like a cultural astronomy or something, anything but the astrology that we've come to know or as developed by the Greeks. And what Dr. Lomi and others, including some other scholars like Chris Brennan, have kind of really surfaced is that um, it's it's not just a matter of contribution, but it's foundational in many
Hmm.
ways, and that's what the Hellenes really came to develop. So I want to start with understanding something about the Egyptian. I also will reference it as Kemetic. The reason why I call it Kemetic is that's what the Egyptians called their land, Kemet. And so, kind of the English derivative would be like to call it Kemetic rather than just Egyptian. It was only the Greeks who referenced them as Egyptian. What you'll see on your right hand side are some source texts that people can reference to better understand some of the thoughts that I'm sharing. So if people want to take a screenshot or as they're looking at this on YouTube, these are great and excellent sources to look up. One of my favorites is more recent favorites is Cult of the Stars, and of course then by Travis McHenry, and then Austin Coppock's 36 Faces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I want to just introduce to folks are the idea of the decans. And the conception of time, and specifically the days, are very different than the 7 days that we've inherited from the Babylonians. And the Egyptians divided their days by 10, meaning that 10 days constituted a week. And so they had 36 weeks. And these 36 weeks became the basis from their calendar for what we call the 36 decans, which I'm going to go more into. And these decans and the rising of these decans became the basis of what we call the horoscope or the horoscopos. Now, there's some other things I mentioned here that I'm only going to mention briefly that really reveal the bedrock foundations related to Western astrology. Is that generally it was perceived that the heliacal rising of the star Sotbet or Sirius um, augured the beginning or the end and then beginning of the Egyptian year. And that
Mm-hmm.
was generally
Mm-hmm.
through what we have as Cancer season. I'm going to go over that a little
Right.
more. And there's some other
The
distinct
dog days of summer,
the dog
when
days of summer
periods.
and the dog star as
Mm-hmm.
as it was later known by the Romans and the Greeks. That's not how the Egyptians thought about that star.
Mm-hmm. No.
And I'm going to go more about it, but that's kind of the key thing. The other thing is that the basis for looking at the top part of the chart as the southern part of the chart and the bottom of the chart as the northern is not only because that is like the literal direction, but that may have also come from the Nile's relatively unique, it's not the only river that does this, but the relatively unique flow of the Nile going from the southern part of Africa to the northern part of Africa. So it doesn't flow like our Mississippi from north
It
to south.
flows like the Red River
Yeah.
from through the Dakotas heading into Canada.
There you go. So yeah, so it's not unique in the sense that there are no other rivers that does this,
Mm-hmm. But
but
it's rare.
it's rare. So the constitution of our charts of east to west with the sun rising and then flowing from south to north, that may also be attributed. So what are the decans? The decans are Egyptian, what we might say Bakhtu, and I will say just that they are asterisms or clusters of stars divided into 36 parts. Not necessarily 10 degrees, which is more from the, I guess, the Western or now Afro-Asiatic point of view, but that is how we might better understand the initial concept of the decans. And the rising of each decan marked the beginning of what we could call a decanal hour, which hour is Greek for hora of the night. And
Mm-hmm.
that was related to or used as a quote unquote star clock, but we might say better as a star map from the 9th or 10th dynasty, roughly around 2100 BCE. Now that becomes an important estimation because that's saying that is older than almost every text that we know of,
Right.
except maybe the Vedas.
Right.
Because a
Over
new
4,000 years.
4,000 years ago, right? Because a new decan also appears over the horizon before the sun every 10 days, which was a week. We now have, when the Egyptians, the Greeks kind of divided up, they called it decanoi, and that's where we actually get that term decans for tenths. But again, the Egyptian term was Bakhtu. Now, this is where I cite almost verbatim from Travis McHenry's great book, Cult of the Stars. And I'm not going to read everything here because your readers
Mm-hmm.
can read. It's also going to be on the YouTube. But one of the things that really I hadn't seen was more the myths generated. And basically, the sun god Ra and Re um, subdued the earlier primordial gods. This is something that also runs in other myths, whether we're talking about Sumerian, Babylonian, or Greek, and then grabbed them by the hair, which is kind of also what Bakhtu means, being subdued by the hair, and that was symbolic for how one asserted power in ancient Egypt. and chopped them into 36 pieces. But
Hmm.
because they were primordial gods, they still had power and resonance.
That's
Um,
beautiful.
and then cast them into the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different permutations of this story, but it's reflective of, understanding that these gods became as guides of Ra or Re, traveling with the solar bark, the sun, through the sky each night, accompanying Ra as he sailed through the body of Nut, which is the sky, the night sky, particularly, fighting off the snake of chaos before emerging on the horizon in the morning. And so, this is, and Duat means more the underworld.
I'm going to just stop here and talk about, and I want to keep going, but for the audience that's following along, when we talk about the decans, that means with a week means of 30 days that each sign has 3 decans. And if you know which decan you're in, that helps you understand your relationship. Instead of 12, it's 36 ways of relating and knowing your neighborhood, knowing where you are, where other planets are that are talking to you, what's the unique atmosphere of that neighborhood that you're in. So that's why we focus on decans, how we pragmatically, but this is the story of behind it. So go take
Yes,
it away. I just
yes.
wanted people to
No,
have
I'm glad you
a
said
reason
that,
for
but
it.
I do want to say
Please.
this.
Hmm.
Um, you're not wrong, but that's not its origins.
Right.
And I think that becomes very
That's more like
important.
how we use it. But
That's
here's
what it
the origin.
became, right?
Right.
This is what it became, or that's what it became. And the purpose of the decans, um, as I mentioned, and we use the 36, but over the thousands of years of its history, of Egypt's history, um those 36 weren't always the same decans, and they weren't always used in the same regions or the same periods of its long history. They were clusters of stars, and some measure of the stars, which stars they actually used that we still reference, is somewhat lost to history. But some of them we have been able to clearly identify, like obviously Sirius, Sopdet, but also Arcturus, Pleiades, Aldebaran, Regulus, and the stars of Orion. And they also divided the decans, they believed, into particular groups. But
Hmm.
they functioned as calendars for festivals, harvests, and other important events. But and then it reflective, these different particular movements were reflective of the movement of each decan as mirroring the rise of the soul from the underworld towards Sirius. And the reason why
Mm.
Travis McHenry calls it the cult of the stars is that he's making the argument that Sutpet was a much more important deity than we've given credit for. And we will, because
And
of the
Sophet is the Sirius star
and a goddess,
goddess.
right? And the Sirius
Hmm.
star, yeah. And she had a consort believed to be Venus, and Venus in this idea is male,
Hmm.
called Sa. And
Hmm.
so the rising of Sirius was responsible for the rise of the soul toward becoming stars
Oh, that's
themselves.
beautiful. Hmm.
So and this was even mirrored in the idea of the pyramids, and the pyramids actually were initially step pyramids, as we also find in
Hmm.
Mexico and other
Hmm.
places. But
And
like the
three.
most people know the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's still reflective of this particular hieroglyph. We'll call them Metanetra. That's their actual name. This hieroglyph you can see features a star. Um, then this other thing relates to the name Sotpet, but you might recognize there's a pyramid related to her. And so what this really means is that the soul is going through or mirroring, and the pyramids were erected to mirror this movement of the soul
Hmm.
as it goes more toward the star, if it's been if you've lived a righteous life, if you've lived a life that is, when your heart is weighed against a feather, of
Right.
ma'at, that you can rise as toward the star. And so this is
And the
mirroring.
alligators don't eat you.
Correct.
And how would that be used? I mean, help me. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful pattern in mythology. How would that be used in looking at the chart of a person? It's a
So
method by which they move into that.
it wasn't so much about a chart.
Right.
It was more so as honoring as during the movement of the year.
Okay.
It was
And
related
they're
to
related, but
in their
then
calendar. Yeah,
right there they were looking at, and I greatly respect that. I'm always looking at where the planets are in movement in relationship to our life and what we're seeing unfolding and how we can use those in our evolution as well as surviving the day.
yeah,
So, and it sounds like that was more their focus than it was
yes,
on the individual chart. So it was
yeah.
talking about the rhythms of the timing. When you see these patterns, this is an opportunity to work with those in a certain way.
And the energies weren't always benefic, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes you're dealing with a malefic um, uh, decan or a malefic deity related to that decan. Sometimes you're dealing with famine or pestilence or other particular things, or you're dealing with a time to conquer. So it is mirroring some dimensions of how we've come to talk about the 12 signs and planets moving through them. But because there's 36, and then even taking out others and putting others in, it was a lot more, I'll say it, complicated, a lot more nuanced. And so here is a replica. Here are two replicas. This is another replica. Some may recognize this. This is from the Temple of Dendera, and this is the Deccan appearance of the Decans on the outer perimeter, mirroring the
Hmm.
zodiac. Now, a lot of people are under the mistaken notion that this is testimony that the Egyptians also created the zodiac. The problem with that, this is from the Ptolemaic era. This is from the era, the Hellenistic era,
Right.
where the
Ptolemy was
the
Greek.
yeah,
Hmm.
where the Greeks and the Romans had brought also not I shouldn't just put it all on them because they drove out the Persians. So the Persians also had brought their, from Babylon, the zodiac. And
Right.
so there was a synthesis that was happening between the long-standing tradition of the Decans with the newer, relatively newer, like in the last 300, 400 years, introduction related to the Mesopotamian zodiac. And so this came much
And I think,
later.
can I just stop? This is a wonderful example about how different approaches to astrology, and I'm thinking Western and Vedic at the moment, is the ongoing contrast, do not need to null each other out. Someone does not need to be wrong to say this is our system of observation and that it can expand your knowledge to try on and expand your awareness by working with this system also, not
Correct.
you're wrong, I'm right.
And this is why I say that the Hellenes were brilliant synthesizers,
Mhm.
and that's what they
Mhm.
did. And so, what happened, to your point earlier, these decans, as they were understood, and these are reflective of particular deities and how they were identified a particular way, became synthesized, and that's what I say. Even though they were associated with the good soul's ascendancy to heaven, and more along the lines of the gods, um, or the idea of gods, and then it became more the daemons, and then related to Christianity and Islam, the jinn, and there's a synthesis that started happening to integrate these particular decans into Hermetic thought, or what became Hellenistic thought, and related to the signs. And so I'll get to that. I'll skip to this. It becomes this. And this is the notion of the decans. And this decan
No,
layout
we're
is
still mainly seeing the your main page. You might
right.
want to, okay, go
Oh,
ahead.
oh, is this? It's not. It didn't advance to
Nope,
showing Cancer rising. I wonder why.
nope,
Suddenly,
because
what?
Mercury is retrograde. Um,
Let me see what you. Let me go back to seeing what you see. Oh, so it never advanced. Oh, my bad. So let me stop sharing. Um, I am so sorry,
not
viewers.
not to worry. Mercury is very retrograde. You've been fascinating without it advancing.
I know. So let me go back so you can see some of what I can you see now where I say
Hold
Egyptian
on.
Kemetic?
Yes, there we are.
So yeah.
Deckhands. Here we go.
So now take a screenshot,
Yep.
and then here are the Decans. That's what I was describing.
Right.
The myth of the Decans,
The cult stars.
purpose of the
Beautiful.
Decans, and then this is the illustration I was talking about with Sirius. This is the actual what's called the hieroglyphic, but the Meta Nature symbol.
Could you go back to that last one, the one before that, this one? The deckhands were put in groups for the year. Now
Yeah.
that's
Now,
really
yes.
interesting.
Yeah, they
And
were.
where does the first one start? Where do
So
they
the
start? The
so the start.
deckhands.
Oh, I'll get to that. I will get to that. So you'll
Okay.
notice that the one for announcing the heliacal rise is at the end of the year. It's the 35th of 36. And so this was the beginning of the year, which is not January. So this is what brings up an interesting point. Like we assigned the first decan.
Mhm.
I'll go a little slower because I didn't realize that these weren't showing. I'm glad you said something. And then here's the fate of the decans. And I'll skip
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
I can come
Mhm.
back to
Mhm.
that. But even the reason why this is called the Thema Mundi,
Yep.
it's believed that one of the reasons why we start with Cancer is related to the heliacal rising of Sirius, of Sotpet.
Mhm.
And so this is why, and then the order for why these signs rule particular signs, or these planets rule particular signs, is based on speed. It's the
Right.
geometry of speed. Mercury for
Mhm.
Gemini and Virgo, and then Venus
Yep.
and Venus, and
Mm.
then onward. But
Right.
here is where we have the emanation of the decans, divisions related to the planets based on that movement of speed. Starting from, we could start it from Cancer, but most often we start from Aries. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
I initially learned this a different way. And I learned this the Indian way, but I didn't know it was Indian, meaning from literally Vedic astrology in India.
Right.
It doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it not
A different system.
a different a system that's not necessarily indigenous to the quote unquote Hellenistic system. And so, if we were looking at this starting from Mars, from Aries, it would go Mars, Sun, Venus, because that's actually the speed in which we go.
Yep.
The Sun,
Yep. Yep.
then Venus, Mercury, Moon,
And then
and then
start over
repeat.
again with
Yeah,
Saturn. Yeah.
Saturn, and then all the way through.
Slower.
Whereas the way I learned it was that we would start with all the planets that rule the fire sign, starting from Aries for Mars,
Mhm.
Sun for Leo, and then this would be Jupiter.
Ah. Right.
That's the
Right.
way
Right.
I initially learned it,
Mhm. Mhm.
dividing again each sign into thirds, with 10 degrees being ruling each particular aspect or part of the sign. That's what it became. That is not the initial Egyptian way of doing it. In fact, and this also relates to correlations, um, the Greeks gave them names for each
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
signs, and more from their gods rather than from the Egyptian gods. And so you can see it's Adonais and Persephone
Mhm.
and Eros. And then it goes also in dividing into the tarot. So all the fire signs are going to be related to the wands. And so we're going to have 2 of wands, 3 of wands, and 4 of wands for Aries. And then we're going to have 5 of wands, 6 of wands, 7 of wands for Leo,
Mhm.
and all
Mhm.
the way
Mhm.
around.
Mhm.
And then you see that what's nice about this table is that it also gives us both sets of decans. Like I'll go to Aries, it gives us the Indian one, Mars, Sun, Jupiter, but it also gives us the Hellenistic one, which again goes according to the Thema Mundi, or related to speed. Or
Mhm.
I should say, not the Thema Mundi, but the Chaldean order of planets, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, all the way around. Now, I do use that system. I don't use the Indian system, because I'm not a Vedic astrologer, but I know Vedic astrologers, that's their breakdown of decans.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I want to deal with a question, um, that anticipating you, and here's my answer. What you'll see here, this was the Egyptian year. Now, what you're seeing on the right hand side is more an estimation of what it would be in our calendar, mainly from when I know it's more in European order,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
more from July 19th through August would be the first month of their year. And that's because, when it would rise, and that would be roughly near the time of the heliacal rising. And you could see that that was closer to, the time of Cancer. I'm sure the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, it one depends on your latitude, and then two, it depends on something that we call the precession of the equinoxes. So in 2100 BCE, I'm sure it was far earlier, probably in June more than it was actually in July.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's a very important point to make in terms of understanding the movement of it. And they didn't necessarily calculate things this way, but that was more the general idea. And as you can see, yeah, there were 12 months because they used a solar year, but they had a whole different way of understanding that movement related to their months using the New Kingdom, their hieroglyphs, and then they even broke down each of those 10 days into thirds related to the heliacal rising of the Deccan. That was the order of it. And so you can see, there's a season, and then each season had, several different months, 4 months related to that. And then the same thing, you had the season of Peret. You're like, well, they only had 3 seasons. Right. Because this is where I take issue with some sidereal astrologers and even some tropical astrologers who say, like, well, you just use the seasons. That's not completely accurate.
Mm-mm.
What we do as tropical astrologers is use the turning of the sun related to 4 key points, what we generally call the Tropic of Cancer, related to the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere, and then more toward the center at the equator between Aries and Libra.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally it. It doesn't matter like we're looking at it just from fall, winter. It's more the turning points because that's what tropos or
Mm-hmm.
tropic literally means.
Yeah,
And
I am I work with Druidry, and our symbol of Awen is 3 beams from the 3 dots. And it's inspiration, but it's also the equinox, the solstices and the equinox, the 3 turning points that we work
you
through
get it.
each year.
Yeah. And so what viewers are looking at now is more a breakdown of what would be the Deccan rising at a particular latitude for Las Vegas, Nevada, that Travis McHenry has come up with to understand over the 10 days, and that would be the heliacal rising of Subdet at on August 11th.
Okay.
That becomes important to understand because that's at that latitude. It may be very different for us, for you in Montana,
Mhm.
it may be a little
Mhm.
earlier, and same for me in Santa Fe. You're like, oh my God, does this tie into Lion Gate? Or, is this the way to understand it? The problem with Lionsgate, there's a lot of problems with it, but the
Mhm.
the one chief problem in trying to understand the rise of the Deccan, and specifically starting with Sopdet, um, is it's going to be on your depending on your latitude, and it's not
Yeah.
going to be just as neat as 8/8 or
No.
August 8th. Um, so you can see this is August 11th. But if we were talking about in Egypt, it probably did commence earlier, maybe toward the end of July, like today.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Or it might be if we're going more toward, a southern latitude, it may be later in August. So
And can you describe again for our audience what when you say when that's rising, that
thank you.
means, specific give them the, how would they're standing in the middle of a field.
So you're standing in the middle of a field just before sunrise. And not even just before sunrise, let's say within an hour of sunrise. Heliacal rising means that this particular star, as part of what we now call, related to Cancer, is rising before the sun. And so you see this star rising, and that's what heliacal rising means, that you can see it clearly coming above the horizon, as versus the sun when it comes above the horizon, which we call dun 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 dawn. And so this is the same idea, and you can see that week 36 is their end of their year. Their year, the first week of the new year, first day of the new year, came about 14, 15 days later. So,
And
yeah,
there are many in the Celtic pattern was to consider Samhain, the cross quarter day, and the working on the cross quarter days, and that Samhain, how Halloween was the death and rebirth of the year. That there are interesting different systems choose different birth times, but we're always dealing with the circle.
absolutely.
And it's an interesting that each, what it looks like when you say, oh, I'm going to end my year this way, in Virgo, the way some do. I'm going to end my year at, that they used to make fun of the people, the April Fools were the people that still celebrated the new year beginning after the vernal equinox instead of after the first day of the first month after the winter solstice, but it tells us something about how we perceive the year and the unfolding of history, where we begin our year, but it's always moving.
It's always moving. And the
Hmm.
thing is, a lot of people, um to I'll say to my dismay, hate on the Gregorian calendar. And I get it. I mean, especially if you want to, point out the arbitrariness of it, like we just did. But the Gregorian calendar, speaking about the creation of Europe,
Hmm.
was really with the idea of coming up with a uniform sense of time, um, in order to have like a civic and religious calendar. That
And
literally, yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
to organize your world, how Capricornian can you be,
Right.
right?
And on that level, it was perhaps for its time one of the most successful calendars created, because many other calendars didn't make always allowance for those discrepancies. This is something that
Hmm. Hmm.
happens
Hmm.
like with the Islamic calendar. It has to have, and this also is true for the Jewish calendar. There's corrections at other months, extra months that have to be introduced that create, can create civic chaos. Especially when you're dealing with trade, which was the
Hmm.
Gregorian calendar's intention. So,
Really interesting.
yeah. Now,
Hmm.
what I'm showing, and I hope this slide is showing, going back,
Person
what we
standing on
call
the planet. Yep, you
with the
send it.
ascendant, what we call the ascendant is based on the decans and the rising of particular decans at particular times. In fact, the word for horoscope comes from horoscopos, which means hour marker, and that is what the ascendant is.
The hour
Speaking of
marker.
rising, it is the hour marker, and that comes from the perception of the decans. And I was just illustrating here,
Mm.
the movement of the Nile coming more from the south in Sudan all the way to what we call the Nile Delta. And then you're like, well, why is that important? I mean, that's an important point, not just because related to the movement of south to north,
It's that
but
worldview.
it's worldview, but and also to remind folks, it's in Africa. I think
Hmm.
some people will look at Egypt and be like, well, we could think of it more Asia. And I'm like, its origins really kind of go even farther than just the Sudan. In the Sudan, there's no debate, especially with the war happening there, that it's in Africa.
Oh yeah, no, there was a lot of uh, debate around that in archaeology about not willing to grant the incredible sophistication of Egypt to Africa and trying to claim it for Europe when it wasn't, when it was
Correct.
African. Yeah,
Yeah. So I think that
including
becomes important.
drawing pictures of pharaohs much lighter than they were.
Exactly. And we can get into debates about whether they're black or whatever, but I think that becomes more illustrative of our own challenges with the
Perceptions.
conceptions of race. There are people in West Africa who would look at me and be like, "You're more white than black." Um, and
Hmm.
I understand why they may say what they're saying,
Hmm.
even though like here, like, no, you're black. And so
Hmm.
it's more about our loose constructions of race, and rather than like, oh, just getting too up in arms about it. I can pause now. I was going to talk a little bit more about the Arabic contribution related to our understanding of astrology, but I know I just went on time, um,
Hmm.
at 2 o'clock, our time.
Yeah,
Um,
we've probably going overhand. Can we come back to that? Can I book
Another
you
time,
again
yeah,
in 6 months and we go chapter two? Because this is really fascinating.
absolutely. Did I stop sharing? I think I did. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
And
So yeah, because I figured that would still be a mouthful for people to
it's a
grasp
lot
with in
to
the
think
terms of the
about.
decans.
So
Yeah, because one is
understanding now what the decans are, how they came about from that story, and how they were Kemetic, and a way of really relooking at our own charts from that perspective of the 10-day week is really fascinating.
and also thinking about its origins. I mean, one of the things that I see as a challenging moment and movement in the last 20, 30 years of
Hmm.
astrology is that we want to always think going back to our roots becomes truth singularly. Going back to ancient Greek astrology, that's the true
Hmm.
roots of
Hmm.
astrology. Going back to Islamic traditions of astrology, that's the true astrology. And
Hmm.
what this research into the decans has highlighted is like, well, if we went back to the decans, it would lay a lot of our conceptions of what is true astrology bare.
Yep.
So I think what we either have to kind of just go back to the original astrology or recognize, as you said, astrology is always changing. There's a confluence of all these different things co-negotiating, cohabitating that we can make space for rather than thinking that we have to go to this archaic past.
I agree completely. And it is about our direct perceptions of the moment, and that the past was interesting pockets of deep understanding where they really focused on their particular perception. But that doesn't make that the true astrology. We can go back and understand this system and get more out of it than we can from a cursory view. But it's an always evolving perception of our world. And that evolving perception, that integrative evolving perception, is our own. It's seeking truth rather than just history, and
I
not
love that.
choosing it as a way of looking for how can I be right and you be wrong, but how how does the truth unfold in all its myriad ways.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Sam.
Thank
I
you.
always love working with you and listening to you, and we're setting ourselves up for the next installment on that.
I'm
How can
looking forward to
people
it.
reach you if they have questions or want to
Thank
get one
you.
of those slides more directly?
So they can actually reach me at unlockastrology.com. They can email me at unlockastrology, all one word, at gmail.com. If they want to also, connect with me through social media, on Instagram, I am S as in Sam, F as in Fred, Reynolds. So SF Reynolds, all one word, on Instagram. And then, and the same, I believe, on Threads. And then on Twitter, X, Unlock Astrology.
Okay. Uh, Wonderful. Thank you so very much. It's been
Thank
a
you.
great pleasure, Sam. And I look forward to seeing you at the next conference, and I will be in contact about when to get you back in about 6 months.
That sounds great. And congratulations
Well,
on the show and keep going.
thank you. You take
All right.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.